The voice came through my phone at 2:00 a.m., 3 years after I buried my mother. My name is Sadie Monroe. I'm 28 and my life is defined by predictability. I work long, draining shifts as a pediatric nurse in a small hospital outside Columbus, Ohio, and I live alone in the silent house where I was raised. This is the house where I learned to be careful. I'm not superstitious. I don't believe in luck, fate, or anything you can't see under a microscope. I check the stove twice and lock the deadbolts 3 times. My caution isn't born of fear. It's born of a lifetime of keeping things together. So when my phone screamed in the dark at 2:07 a.m. on a cold Thursday in late February, and the screen flashed the one name it shouldn't have, I knew I wasn't having a breakdown. I was wide awake, staring at the contact, Mom. Renata Monroe, deceased, 3 years. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic clanking of the old radiator in the corner. I had just finished a brutal double shift, 16 hours straight, and the exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing me into the mattress. Coffee and adrenaline were wearing off, leaving a numb clarity. I let the first call go to voicemail. It's a recycled number, I told myself, the logical part of my brain scrambling for purchase. Some stranger has her old line and they misdialed. It was the only acceptable explanation. Then the phone rang again, same name, same number. This time I answered. I didn't speak. I held the cold plastic shell to my ear and listened to the silence on the other end. It was heavy, expectant, the silence of someone waiting for you to say hello. Sadie, the voice finally came, a low, familiar murmur. Sweetie, it's Mom. The blood drained from my head. It wasn't just the words, it was the texture of the voice. The familiar cadence, the slight, almost imperceptible tremor that had developed near the end of her life. It was the voice that read me bedtime stories, the voice that calmed me after nightmares, the voice that whispered, "We're going to be just fine," after my father left. I couldn't move, I couldn't form a single word, my lungs seized up. "Baby, I'm outside," the voice continued, soft but insistent. "The porch light is out, I can't see the keyhole, can you let me in?" I slammed the phone down onto the duvet. The sudden noise was deafening in the dark room. I pressed my hands to my face, digging my thumbs into my eye sockets, trying to force myself back into the black oblivion of sleep. It had to be a hallucination, a trick of the overstressed mind. But the radiator still clanked, the sheets were still cool against my skin, and the air still held that faint, lingering scent of my mother's lavender lotion. Everything was too solid. Then came the sound that shattered my carefully constructed composure. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the front door, not the rushed, impatient knock of a solicitor or a late-night caller. It was her knock. My mother, Renata, never used the doorbell. She said it was too loud, too startling. She always knocked 3 times, measured and patient like a heartbeat. I got out of bed. My legs felt like foreign objects, but they moved, pulling me toward the front of the house. Every instinct screamed at me to hide, to call 911, to grab the baseball bat next to my bed. But a terrible, magnetic curiosity, a desperate need for the impossible to be true, dragged me into the dark hallway. I didn't turn on a single light. I moved through the layout I knew intimately, past the living room where she took her last breath, toward the front door. I pressed my eye to the brass peephole. She was there, standing on the porch, bathed in the sickly orange halo of the distant street lamp. She wore the familiar, slightly oversized grey cardigan, the very one she'd been buried in. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her hands were clasped in front of her, patient and still. Her face was calm, familiar, unmarred by 3 years of decay. She was perfectly, impossibly my mother. I stumbled back, my shoulder hitting the wall with a dull thud. Tears welled up, hot and irrational. This wasn't grief playing tricks. This was something standing on my porch that looked like my dead mother and sounded like my dead mother. I fumbled for my phone and blindly dialed Aunt Delia, my mother's younger sister. "Sadie, it's 2:00 a.m. What's wrong?" Delia's voice was heavy with sleep. "Someone at the door," I whispered, the words shaking. They look like Mom, her number called me, and now she's standing there." The sleep evaporated from Delia's voice. "Listen to me, Sadie. Do not open that door, do not say another word. I'm calling the police and I'm coming over. You stay put." She hung up, leaving me alone in the hallway, clutching the phone like a lifeline. But I couldn't stay put. This thing on the porch, whether ghost, demon, or very cruel human, knew too much. The phone number, the knock, the voice, it was a level of detail that defied coincidence. Then her voice drifted through the thick wood of the door. muffled but perfectly clear. Sadie, I know you're terrified, but you have to trust me. Ask me something. Ask me the one thing no one else could possibly know. I moved toward the door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I needed something private. Not a birthday, not a name, something locked away in the most painful corner of my memory, something I had never told anyone. I leaned my head against the door and whispered, "What did you say to me the night before my 8th grade graduation, when I was crying in the bathroom?" Silence, a profound, endless silence that lasted perhaps 30 seconds but felt like an hour. "Then I told you that your father leaving wasn't your fault. You thought it was because you weren't a boy. I told you that you were the only thing I ever did right." I slid down the wall to the floor, my legs giving out. Tears were streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of utter, absolute confusion. Those words, that secret belief of a 12-year-old girl, had never left that bathroom. They lived only in my head and in the memory of my mother. I stood up shaking and slowly reached for the locks. 2 deadbolts and a chain. My careful, cautious mother had installed them. I turned the first. I turned the second. I slid the chain. With a deep, shuddering breath, I turned the handle and pulled the door inward. She was standing right there, the lines around her eyes, the small scar on her chin. She was perfect. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly. "You're not real," I whispered. "I watched you die." Her eyes filled with a grief that looked devastatingly authentic. "I'm real," she insisted. "I'm just not who you think I am. Can I come inside? I'll explain everything." I stepped back and she walked past me into the house. She paused in the living room, her eyes sweeping over the space, lingering on the spot where the hospital bed had been. "She was beautiful," she murmured, looking at my mother's framed photograph on the mantel. "I always wondered what she looked like." I closed the door and leaned against it, the chain still dangling. "Who are you?" She turned to face me. The resemblance was striking, but the differences were now apparent, a slightly straighter posture, a subtle unfamiliarity in her gaze. She was a slightly different version of my mother. "My name is Marina," she said, her voice steady. "Marlena Davis, and I'm your mother's twin sister." The words were a physical blow. "That's impossible. My mother didn't have a twin, she only had Aunt Delia." "We were separated at birth," Marina explained, reaching into her cardigan pocket. "Different adoptions, different families, different states. I grew up in Vermont. I didn't know I had a sister until 6 months ago." She held out a folded piece of paper, a DNA test result from an ancestry website. It showed a 99.98% probability of a full sibling relationship with Renata Monroe. "I found her too late," Marina's voice cracked. "By the time I tracked her down, she was already gone. I missed her by 3 years. 3 years, Sadie." I took the paper, the numbers swimming through my tears. This wasn't a ghost. This was an answer, impossible and real. "The phone number," I whispered, the final puzzle piece. "How did you get her phone number?" Marina smiled sadly. "She didn't change it often. When my parents passed, I got a new phone and I started saving the numbers of my biological family, just in case. Hers was the first one I tried. It must have been reassigned to a prepaid service because it still rings. It must have been fate, don't you think?"